Preface, crowned by the river. In the quiet embrace of the river's flow, where the ancient sands of Egypt meet the life-giving waters of the Nile, a story unfolds, not of conquest or grand battles, but of a journey rooted in the rhythms of the earth, the pulse of the people, and the sacred duty passed down through the ages. Crowned by the river, a Bronze Age journey is the tale of a young prince's path to kingship, but more than that, it is a journey into the heart of a kingdom, the forging of identity, and the quiet wisdom that comes from understanding one's place within a vast, interconnected world. Through the eyes of a prince, who stands on the threshold of becoming the ruler of all Egypt, this story offers a glimpse into the world of ancient bronze artisans, priests, scribes, and farmers, those whose hands shape the land as much as their hearts shape the spirit of the people. It is a tale woven from the fires of the forge, the sacred chants of temples, the quiet wisdom of elders, and the love and loss that forever marks the human soul. With each chapter, we witness not just the growth of a prince, but the growth of a kingdom, one founded not on stone and gold alone, but on the bonds that connect every individual to the land they cultivate, the stories they pass on, and the gods they revere. In this journey, we are reminded that power does not rest solely in the weight of a crown, but in the lessons learned from those who came before us and in the quiet moments where destiny is shaped not by force, but by choice. This story is a tribute to those who rise not by seeking the throne, but by listening to the wisdom of the world around them. It is a tale of becoming, a becoming that is forged in the fire of the forge, the wisdom of the scribe, and the balance of the river's flow. Crowned by the River, a Bronze Age Journey. Chapter 1, The Temple of Beginnings. I was born beneath the gaze of Horus, in a chamber perfumed with blue lotus and warmed by the desert sun filtered through linen curtains. My earliest memory is not of my mother's voice or my nurse's lullabies, but of the temple, its columns rising like stone palms, etched with the stories of gods who whispered in every gust of incense-laced air. It was there, within the sacred hush of the sanctuary, that I first sensed the shape of destiny. The temple was the heart of our world. Even as a child, I felt its pulse in the measured chants of the priests, in the gleam of bronze censers swinging gently from practiced hands. I remember how the gods were everywhere, painted on the walls, carved into stone, breathed into statues that stood still yet watched with ageless eyes. I was taught that Ma'at, the balance of all things, held the kingdom together, not just through sword and grain, but through reverence. My father, the pharaoh, stood as the living Horus, his voice law, his silence thunder. Yet in the temple, even he bowed his head. I would clutch the hem of his robe, half hidden behind him, as the high priest placed offerings before the great golden idol of Amun-Ra. The air would shimmer with heat and smoke, and the scent of frankincense would wrap itself around my senses like a mother's embrace. I didn't fully understand then, but I felt the weight of it, the sacred dance between man and God. Beyond the temple walls, life in the palace unfolded in its ordered rhythm. Servants moved like shadows through the halls, their heads low, their feet silent on cool limestone floors. Viziers in white robes whispered counsel in shaded alcoves, their fingers stained with ink. I watched them with wide eyes, those who toiled not with tools or weapons, but with thought and parchment. But it was the artisans who fascinated me most. Down by the western courtyard, a fire never died. There, beneath a canopy of reeds and smoke, the bronze workers shaped our world. I would sneak away from my tutors to sit cross-legged in the dust, watching the dance of flame and metal. I remember the clang of hammer on anvil, the hiss of molten bronze poured into stone molds, the sharp, metallic scent that clung to my skin like an invisible mark. They crafted not only blades and tools, but sacred items, amulets, ritual knives, and delicate figures of gods and beasts. Their hands, calloused and darkened, brought divinity into form. You must learn their names, my mother once told me, brushing coal along her eyes as we prepared for a festival. A king does not rule above his people. He stands among them, knowing who lifts the stone, who writes the law, who sings the dawn into being. Her voice was soft, but her gaze was firm, the way Nile water looks still while it moves with purpose beneath. I took her words to heart. Each day, I would greet the head scribe by name. I would pause to ask the stonemason what he carved today, and listen as he described the wings of Isis unfolding in the wall relief. I grew familiar with the rhythms of court and craft, with the quiet pride of the baker offering his golden loaves to the temple, and the measured confidence of the charioteer as he polished bronze fittings under the morning sun. These moments shaped me more than lineage. One afternoon, as the sky burned with the red fire of sunset, I stood alone in the inner temple. The priests had withdrawn, and the hush felt alive. I reached out, my fingers brushing the bronze statue of Thoth, god of wisdom. The metal was cool, though the day had been hot. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of stone, oil, and time. In that stillness, I didn't feel like a prince. I felt like a vessel, something waiting to be filled. That night, I dreamt of the river. Wide and slow, carrying boats of cedar and sails painted like birds. In the dream, I stood at the helm, not yet king, not yet man, but something beginning. Even now, with the weight of the crown resting on my brow and the eyes of the court watching my every movement, I return to that dream. To the sound of bronze ringing through the courtyard, to the echo of chants within the temple, to the warmth of a priest's smile and the wisdom in a mother's eyes. That was where it all began. Chapter 2, Under the Copper Sky. The first time I stepped beyond the palace walls without the full retinue of guards and advisors, I felt as though I were stepping into the breath of the gods themselves. The sky above was vast and burnished, not gold, but something deeper, like the gleam of copper when the sun catches it just so. The air was thick with the scent of river mud and warm grain, and for the first time, I saw not only my kingdom, but the souls who shaped it. We followed the Nile southward, our modest party drifting along its winding path. Each morning, the river shivered with light, and the papyrus reeds whispered secrets to the wind. My tutor, wise Meripta, sat beside me beneath the shade of a woven canopy, his scrolls tied and tucked away. Today, we do not learn from texts, he said, eyes glinting. We listen to the people. Our first stop was a farming village nestled between the river and a grove of date palms. The moment my feet touched the soil, I was struck by the rhythm of life there, not the ceremonious rhythm of court, but the hum of something older, deeper. Women stooped in the fields, their laughter rising like birdsong as they gathered wheat with curved bronze sickles. Children herded goats through dusty alleys, their bare feet kicking up clouds of ochre light. Everywhere, hands were busy, weaving mats, shaping pottery, grinding grain on sun-warmed stones. I knelt beside a farmer as he sharpened his tool. His hands were rough, the skin darkened from years beneath the sun, but his voice was gentle. "This blade feeds my family," he said, lifting the bronze edge to the light. "The earth listens better when the tool is honest." I nodded, unsure what to say. His words were simple, but they rang with a kind of truth no scroll had ever offered me. That evening, we dined with his family beneath a simple canopy of reeds. The stew was thick with lentils and herbs, and I drank sweet date wine from a clay cup etched with spirals. No one spoke of my title. They spoke of weather, of the coming flood, of how many jars of grain the storehouse still held. They included me not as a prince, but as a guest, one of them, for a time. From village to village, we traveled. In a town where the air smelled of dye and wool, I met weavers whose fingers moved like water across the loom. "Every pattern has meaning," one said, showing me a robe woven with zigzags and lotus flowers. "Even a thread speaks, if you listen." I did not wear that robe then, but I carry the memory of its texture against my fingertips still. And in the markets of Thebes, great and sprawling beneath the city's high walls, I felt the pulse of Egypt's farthest edges. Traders from lands I had only seen inked on maps hawked their wares with melodic tongues. There were oils from Punt, incense from Canaan, turquoise from Sinai, and cedarwood from distant Byblos. I touched a gleaming blue stone and marveled at its cool smoothness, the way it caught the light like water. "Everything has a story," Meripta murmured beside me. "Trade is not only for wealth. It is for connection. The gods delight in bridges between worlds." The city itself was a wonder, its broad avenues crowded with ox carts and donkeys, with veiled women balancing baskets and boys chasing dogs through alleyways. The scent of fresh bread mingled with the sharp tang of metal and the sweetness of honeycakes baking in clay ovens. I saw scribes hunched over scrolls, recording harvests and births, disputes and judgments, their reed pens dancing across smooth papyrus. On a public wall, I watched a young man carve a decree from the palace into stone, his chisel striking rhythmically, methodically, turning words into something enduring. That night, I sat on a rooftop and watched the stars will over the city. The sounds of Thebes, laughter, shouting, a distant flute, drifted up to me on warm air. I felt the weight of it all, the thousands of lives woven together like the linen on my skin. I thought of the farmer's hands, the weaver's gaze, the scribe's brush, the trader's tongue. It was here, under this copper sky, that I began to understand, a kingdom is not built of stone or ruled by decree. It is lived, in every shared loaf of bread, in every carved amulet passed from mother to daughter, in every humble act of labor and love. When I returned to the palace, the walls did not seem so high. The pillars, though tall, no longer made me feel small. I had walked among my people. And in doing so, I had begun to carry them with me, not as subjects, but as kin. Chapter 3, Fire of the Forge. There comes a time when the softness of youth begins to crack, not from cruelty, but from heat, the kind that reshapes, not destroys. For me, that fire lived in the forges of Memphis, where the air shimmered with soot and power, and where bronze was born not from earth alone, but from intention. I was 16 when my father sent me there, to the heart of the workshops that armed our soldiers and stocked our temples. A king who has never held a hammer, he said, will not know how to carry a crown. At first, I thought it was merely another lesson, like memorizing tax codes or tracing the lineage of our gods. But in Memphis, I found a different kind of knowledge, one earned with sweat and sparks, and silence. The master smith, Menka, was a man of few words. His eyes were pale from years beside the flame, his voice hoarse from breathing smoke. He did not bow when I arrived. Instead, he pressed a heavy apron into my arms and pointed to the bellows. "Feed the fire," was all he said. And so I did. For days, I stood with the workers, not above them, not apart, pumping the bellows until my arms ached, my palms blistered. I watched as they smelted copper from the eastern mountains and tin traded across deserts, fusing the two into bronze so molten and bright it looked like sunlight caught in a bowl. With hammers shaped like stone fists, they forged blades, tools, ornaments, each one precise, balanced, enduring. Menka showed me how to polish a blade until it shone, how to temper it with water and will. "Bronze doesn't forget your hands," he said, placing a newly cast dagger in my grip. "It carries the shape of your intent." I still have that dagger, hidden beneath royal silks, not as a weapon, but as a memory. Alongside the forge, I trained with warriors of the guard. They taught me to hold a shield steady, to strike with purpose, not anger. At dusk, we'd spar in the courtyard, the ring of bronze on bronze echoing against the temple walls. Yet my greatest lessons came not from combat, but from watching how these men, grizzled, scarred, noble in their silence, bowed to something greater than might. They fought not for glory, but for the order our land depended on. One evening, after a long day of training, I was summoned to the Hall of Records. There, in a cool chamber lit by oil lamps, I met Shira, an elder scribe whose fingers were ink-stained and trembling, yet whose mind moved with sharp clarity. She unrolled papyrus after papyrus, showing me the veins of our kingdom, records of land ownership, grain rations, temple offerings, births, deaths, and disputes resolved by decree. "Every number here is a person," she said, tapping the symbols gently. "Their needs, their hopes, their place in the balance. A king must read between the lines." I spent weeks under her watchful eye, learning the intricacies of tax ledgers, the symbols of law, the subtle patterns that marked a healthy kingdom from a troubled one. It was not glamorous work, but it was sacred as any temple rite. In time, I joined my father at council. I sat beside him in the great hall, where ministers, generals, and high priests debated matters of grain stores, border skirmishes, water rights. There were no raised voices, only the weight of words chosen with care. I learned when to speak, when to listen, and how power was not taken, but earned, word by word, decree by decree. And then, as fire tempers metal, loss came to shape me. My brother, Saddam, younger by only a year, fell ill during the spring floods. The healers tried everything, honeyed wine, lotus oil, prayers whispered to Sekhmet, but the fever took him before the barley harvest. I remember sitting beside him in the garden, where he once chased lizards between date palms, now quiet beneath linen wraps. In the stillness that followed, I walked alone to the forge. Menka was there, as always. Without speaking, he handed me a piece of cooled bronze, a small, unfinished figure. It was a falcon, its wings barely formed. "For him," he said. I carved it myself, slow, careful, letting the grief move through my hands. When it was done, I placed it in Saddam's tomb, tucked between jars of bread and wine, and whispered a promise to the god Horus, that I would rise, as my brother could not. After that, something in me settled. Not hardened, no, but deepened. As bronze must be poured, cooled, and shaped before it becomes more than metal, I too had been formed. Now, when I walk the palace corridors, scrolls in hand, bronze dagger at my hip, I feel the quiet strength of those who taught me, the smith, the scribe, the soldier. I am not yet king. But I am no longer only a prince. I am becoming. Chapter 4, Crowned by the River. The day I became king began not with trumpets, but with silence. I rose before the sun and stepped barefoot into the cool hush of my chamber. Outside, the city still slept beneath its canopy of stars. From the window, I could see the Nile, dark and still, winding like a thread of memory through the land. The water shimmered faintly, as if the gods themselves stirred beneath its surface. Today, I would wear the double crown. Today, I would step fully into the current that had carried my ancestors across centuries. But before the ceremony, before the crowds and chants and gold, I needed to be alone. I slipped through the sleeping palace, past limestone pillars etched with the names of kings, and made my way to the water's edge. There, beside the river that had always felt more like a mother than a boundary, I knelt and cupped my hands. The water was cold and tasted of silt and thyme. I let it drip from my fingers and whispered the names of those who had shaped me, my brother, my mother, my teacher, the smith. Not one of them bore a crown, but each had carved something into me more lasting than stone. The sun rose slowly, gilding the city in bronze light. It struck the temple domes and market roofs, the workshops and granaries, the ink-stained fingers of scribes already at their scrolls. Cairo was not yet born, but Memphis lived, a hive of breath and fire, sweat and hope. By midday, the great procession began. Musicians lined the palace causeway, their harps and flutes weaving a melody both solemn and soaring. Scribes recorded every moment, their brushes dancing across scrolls with reverent speed. Children scattered lotus petals before my path, and artisans held aloft their finest wares, polished bronze amulets, woven linens, painted jars sealed with beeswax. I passed the bread makers, who bowed with flour-dusted hands, the potters, their fingers still warm with clay, the guards in bronze armor who had watched me grow tall enough to meet their eyes. And in their gaze, I saw not fear, not awe, but recognition, the kind that says, "We have walked beside you." At the great temple of Amun-Ra, the high priest stood waiting. His robes shimmered like sunlit papyrus, and he carried the ceremonial oil, thick with myrrh and cedar. I ascended the temple steps alone, the heat of the stone soaking into my soles, the chants of the priests rising behind me like wind in the sails of a riverboat. Inside the sanctuary, cool and shadowed, the gods waited. Statues of gilded bronze loomed in silence, Isis with her outstretched wings, Osiris seated in still majesty, Thoth with his ibis head, forever writing the truths of the world. Before them, the high priest anointed me. He spoke the ancient words, not as a spell, but as a bridge, linking my mortal breath to the divine current that had flowed through pharaohs before me. "You are the shepherd of Ma'at," he said. "The bearer of order. The listener of the people. The voice of the land." Then came the final act, the double crown, white of Upper Egypt and red of Lower, placed upon my brow. I expected it to feel heavy. Instead, it was like stepping into a river you've always known but never dared to swim, a deep, cool clarity spreading through every limb. When I stepped out onto the palace balcony, the city erupted in joy. Horns blared, dancers spun like leaves in the wind, and the scent of roasted duck and cumin drifted from the festival fires. Below, the people raised their hands, not to worship, but to welcome. From the fisherman whose nets I had once helped mend, to the potter who gave me a bowl glazed in cobalt and laughter, to the traders whose camels smelled of far-off lands, their faces shone with the same light that gilded the temples. And in that moment, I knew, I was not crowned to stand above them, but among them. That night, under the stars, I walked the palace gardens with the new weight of rulership on my shoulders. Yet it was not burden, but balance. The kind of balance that comes from knowing your place in something vast and sacred, a chain of hands stretching back to the first reeds plucked from the riverbank. In my chambers, beside the scrolls and seals and newly stamped decrees, I placed a small bronze falcon on the shelf. Its wings were still half folded, a thing unfinished, in motion. Like me. For a king is not born in a single day, nor shaped by gold or crown. He is forged, in fire and silence, in soil and scrolls, in the eyes of his people and the stories they carry. And as the Nile flowed past my window, whispering of harvests to come and journeys yet to begin, I understood, this was not an ending. It was the beginning of 1,000 days of listening.